NBC Justice correspondent Ken Dilanian reports from Washington. With us here in studio, NBC's Vaughn Hilliard, who covers the president-elect, and State Attorney General for Palm Beach County, Dave Ehrenberg, who left the sunshine and came here to New York City. We're glad to have him. Vaughn, I guess that is the big overarching picture now that these cases have been dropped. Does it embolden Donald Trump for a second term?
Especially coming out of the Supreme Court's immunity ruling here, in which all of his interactions...
Win-win-win.
Win-win-win. And all of his interactions with his Department of Justice in 2020, some controversial, some in which he was even suggesting, allegedly, that his Attorney General should release erroneous reporting that the election was stolen from him and that there was fraud, which, of course, was not the fact. But what the Supreme Court determined was that even upon leaving the White House, that none of that would have been chargeable, that none of it would have been criminal because he was serving in the capacity of president. And then even his interactions, what he tweeted out when he was in the White House, that was also protected and found to be immune. So it suddenly calls into question, what would Donald Trump have to do in the White House to actually cross that threshold in which it would not be a part of his official duties and his capacity, because he was essentially going to be able to get away with all 4 of these criminal indictments and everything that came with them. There's going to be no consequences, most likely, in the end. So for Donald Trump, he's got 4 years ahead of him. I'm sure that he's planning to commit crimes, but he knows that at least at the bare minimum, he has a great deal of protection.
So I guess it raises a question for everyday Americans, for lack of a better phrase, Dave. Does it mean, or does it say that for certain people, or at least one person, the law may not apply?
For one person, it is frustrating as a prosecutor because you believe in the rule of law, but the Supreme Court put its thumb on the scale, said that the president gets broad immunity. You can't even use official act evidence to prove unofficial crimes. So it does seem like someone is above the law. And even if he does commit crimes in the next 4 years, do you think that prosecutors are going to prosecute him when he's 82 years old, when he leaves office? I don't think so, especially because he's so good at delays that the prosecutors may just say, hey, he's done, let it go.
So, Ken, how could this change the Justice Department and how it views appointing outside special counsels?
That's a really interesting question, Chris, because Todd Blanche is going to be the number 2 at the Justice Department. He just got finished winning an argument down with Judge Eileen Cannon in Florida that the way the Justice Department appoints special counsels is illegal and unconstitutional. But that is not the Justice Department's position. And that court ruling is not binding on the Justice Department. And there are going to be opportunities and maybe motivations for Donald Trump and his Attorney General Pam Bondi to want to appoint a special counsel. You can foresee a situation where they might want to appoint a special counsel to investigate the investigators, the way they did in the first term with John Durham. And so it's going to be really interesting to see whether the DOJ changes its position with Todd Blanche at the number 2 slot, or whether they just decide that that view is no longer operative and that they can still appoint special counsels where there are conflicts of interest or where they need to investigate their own people, Chris.
And somebody who could play into this, as you well know, Ken, is Kash Patel. It's someone that you said just this morning is the personification of MAGA rage. He's sworn vengeance against the department. So what could it look like to have him appointed to a position on the inside?
Yeah, personification of MAGA rage, particularly aimed at what he calls the deep state, at the FBI, at the Justice Department, at the intelligence community. He's been making wild and baseless charges for years, and he seems to really believe that the FBI was corruptly twisted into investigating Donald Trump for political reasons, which there's no evidence to support that whatsoever, but he seems to want to get in there and investigate that question, and he may well succeed in doing that. But in order to investigate, you got to have some kind of predication. If you want to have FBI agents looking into this, if you want to have a prosecutor with subpoena power looking into this, you can't just do it out of thin air. But it's going to be a really interesting stress test, really, for the system to see if people like Kash Patel get in there and start asking career public servants to do things that may not be supported by the facts, Chris.
Well, one thing we already do know, Vaughn, based on some of the people that Donald Trump has picked, is that wild and baseless charges, making them is not disqualifying. It may, in fact, be a positive for some folks. And I wonder if there are conversations behind closed doors right now about where might be the best place for someone like Kash Patel.
Right. Kash Patel spoke just before Donald Trump took the stage at a rally in the final month of the election in Las Vegas, Nevada, at an event that I was at. He has remained a close ally to people like Rick Grenell. He's appeared on Steve Bannon's War Room podcast. He is somebody who has remained part of this nucleus of individuals who did not run away from Donald Trump in the immediate aftermath of the January 6th attack and upon his departure from Washington. And this calls into question, I had early reporting that he was under consideration, along with Ken, under consideration to be the FBI director. Of course, that would be a confirmable position, and it would require Donald Trump firing Chris Wray, whose tenure term does not end officially until 2027. But you could install him into a DOJ position or in the side of the FBI in a political appointee position that does not require Senate confirmation. There's about 4,000 political appointee jobs across the federal government, the executive branch. Just 1,000 of them actually require to be Senate confirmed. And so the question here is whether Donald Trump will try to go that route and potentially put him in an FBI director role, or go the safer route and just make sure that he's in one of these positions.
So, Dave, let's talk about the possibility of investigating the investigators. But that's just like one in a long list, right, of people who have been suggested that either by Donald Trump or by his allies that a new administration could go after. Yes, maybe folks at the DOJ. Yes, maybe people who are in the media that they don't like. And Democratic lawmaker Chris Murphy said this. Take a listen.
I'm getting prepared for the worst, which is, arrest warrants for members of Congress.
Arrest warrants, Dave, for members of Congress. How concerning is it? These are the folks who are supposed to provide some of the checks and balances to the president, who could be afraid potentially of speaking out.
Under Attorney General Matt Gaetz, you would have seen that. I don't think you'll see that with Attorney General Pam Bondi. I think there will be investigations in the investigators, but they have to be careful not to overplay their hand. Remember John Durham? He investigated the investigators, and it blew up in his face. He was humiliated with quick jury acquittals. So this may sound like a great idea for Trump and MAGA world, but remember, Trump says that he got more popular when he was sitting as a defendant in that courtroom. Does he really want the same to be true for Liz Cheney or Adam Schiff? They would become immediate presidential candidates. So be careful what you wish for.
Ken Delaney and Vaughn Hilliard, Dave Ehrenberg, great to have you here in person. Thank you all.